Howdy everyone. As you can see, I have what from this perspective would be the bottom half of this assembly completely clecoed around this edge and this inside edge. That is actually the front of this assembly, so it's front side down on my workbench. So now I am starting to fit the back halves to this front assembly. And here's something that I've noticed, and it's not the end of the world, but it's just something to consider. When you look at this seam, hopefully this will show up because everything's kind of reflective. When you look at this seam here, this gap, the gap here between this piece and this piece, look at how it varies. See, like right here above this cleco, see how small that gap is? And then look at how big it is here. And then look at how small it gets here. And look at the difference between this gap and this gap. But if you look at that gap along this entire piece all the way around, it is all over the place. And what I found out was it's the flange cut line. It appears to me like these pieces were bent to shape and then the flanges were cut off. This piece and this piece, these half pieces, all four of these individual halves, if you will, or individual quarters, this cut line along the flange is very wavy. It's just kind of all over the place. Now I've got this clecoed here, and I've got this flat on my worktop, and I've gone around and I've pushed down on all of these, and I've measured from, I pushed down here to flatten these out. And I've measured from the countertop up to this flat surface here, and it's 1.5 inches consistently across this whole piece, which is what the plans dictate, that this thickness, this overall thickness is 1.5 inches. It's 1.5 inches consistently all the way around. So that means that this flange is cut very wavy. That's why this gap in between here is all over the place. So when you lay out your hole marks, right, you have to measure edge distance, and the edge is obviously this cut line that's wavy. And that bothered me a little bit because you can see, like here, I measured, like I said, it's edge distance that you're measuring. Since this is the edge, this is what you're measuring from. So from here to your mark is your edge distance. That's what you want to maintain. But since the edge itself is all over the place, you can see the difference from this mark to this radius. And then look at just 2 holes down, look at the difference from the mark to the radius. This is really close to the radius. This is quite a ways away from the radius. And the reason is, like I keep saying, is this edge is cut very wavy. So to maintain edge distance, your holes have to follow the waviness of this edge. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, you could, I doubt that you can see it on camera, but you could see it with the naked eye. You could see this cut line from this perspective is like way up here, and then as it comes across, it drops way down. It gets closer to the clecos here, and it's further away from the clecos here. But what's most important is that the entire assembly is flat, and with these halves stacked on top, I've got a consistent 1.5 inches thickness all the way around. That's what's important. The holes are going to end up where they end up. All right, so as you can see, I've got this piece marked with my hole locations. I'm going to go ahead and lay out this piece for the holes, and then I'll go ahead and drill these out just like I had done these on the drill press. And then I'll come back, put them back on, and then match mark through these holes into the strap. And then I'll have to remove the straps, drill all of those, and then put it all back together with Clecos. All right, stand by. Alrighty, so back on the bench, I have the pieces in place that I have already drilled. I've drilled these back pieces, and I've already done the countersinking on them on the outside. I've got them now fitted to the rest of the framework, and I'm starting to drill these holes into the strap that's underneath here. Like I said on the plans, they tell you to maintain 1.5 inch thickness overall of this assembly. So here's what I'm doing. Of course, I lined up the seam between these two pieces with the line that I had drawn on the strap piece here. On both of these inner strap pieces, I had drawn a center line. So I have this line, or this seam, lined up with that mark on both sides. Got the pieces in place. And now all I'm doing, I basically lay a straight edge across the piece. I use a ruler and have it down on the table. And then I make sure that, let me see if I can do this better here. Stand by. So I have my straight edge going across the width of the piece. And then I just take a ruler and put it down on the table, and then I line up the 1.5 inch mark on the ruler with the bottom edge of my straight edge here. And if it's a little too low, I'll pull it up, obviously, and if it's too high, I'll clamp it with a C-clamp, which is what I'm doing here. So I had just done this hole, and all I did was, like I said, if you can ignore the chips that are in here for a moment, I have my straight edge. I take my ruler. I'll use this hole, this next hole here as an example. There's my straight edge. I put my ruler down. And then I just measure, I look at the bottom edge of the straight edge and make sure that it lines up with the 1.5 inch mark on the ruler. And then if I need to flatten it a little bit, I use the C-clamp to bring the overall thickness down to 1.5 inches. And then with it held in place, I go ahead and match drill that hole, and then I put a Cleco in it. Now you can see I'm skipping holes because I just want to get an overall 1.5 inches at a few locations. This side is already done. I've got a Cleco here, 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 and here. And I just started on this side. I got a Cleco here, here, and here. I'll probably do 2 more. And then I'll start doing the outside edge. Now I've started the outside edge on this one, but I stopped because this outside edge is countersunk. So you have a very thin guide, if you will, when you match drill. And I noticed when I started to match drill those couple of outside holes, it was actually starting to elongate the thin countersink down at the bottom. It started to elongate that. These holes are not countersunk, so you have a thicker guide, if you will, for the hole as you drill it. So I decided to do this side, this inside first. Now when I come to the outside, when I put my clamp on to get my 1.5 inch thickness, this will be held nice and firm, and I should be able to drill through it and get a little better finish without elongating the thin part of the countersink. So that's kind of the idea behind that. So I'm going to go ahead and do 2 more here, and then I'll probably do same thing on the outside. I'll probably do 2 more on the outside here. Then of course I'll do probably 4 on this outside edge. And then at that point, I can just go ahead and fill in the blanks, so to speak. All right, so that's kind of the way that I'm doing it. Seems to work really well. This is a nice flat level bench top, so using it as a reference to measure off of, I think works well. So moving on. Howdy everyone. So as you can see, I now have the cabin frame completely assembled, and it obviously is held together with just clecos at the moment. So like I had explained before, the thickness of the part, so if you can imagine if the part is laying on the bench, so if you measure from the bench top to this top face, that should measure 1.5 inches. So the assembled part needs to be 1.5 inches thick. And all I had done was I used a C-clamp to pinch it to that 1.5 inch dimension, and then I'd drill a hole, put a cleco in it, and then I'd move down maybe 4 or 5 clecos, do it again, move down 4 or 5 clecos, do it again. And I'd do that on both sides, on this outer side and on this inner side. And then I'd come back and I'd basically fill in the gaps between those clecos. So then if I had a cleco here and a cleco over here, I'd take a measurement in the middle, and if I needed to, I would clamp it to get the 1.5 inches, and then I would drill those holes. And I just kept working my way around. I started in the middle and I'd do a few out this way, and then I'd come back and do a few this way, and then I would do a few more here and a few more here, and then I'd do the other side. Like I said, I decided to start with the inside because those holes were complete holes, if you will, and they made for a good drill guide to drill through. These holes on the outside are countersunk, so you have very thin material as your guide. I felt better doing the inside first because I figured once that was clecoed, this outside wouldn't move quite as much, and there was less of a chance of me elongating the existing countersunk hole. But after I had done the inside and I started doing the outside, I did notice that I was no longer elongating holes, and they all came out really nice. So I'm happy with that. One thing that I did notice is that at this point, with it not riveted, it can still flex. So I can hold this end down flat to the table, and I can reach over here and lift this end up a little bit. And then the whole piece will kind of wobble. And I can hold the end down here and then push this end back down flat, and it stays nice and sturdy like it is now. You can see there's no movement. It's perfectly flat right now. So that tells me that it does flex a little bit, even though it's only held down with clecos. It's only held together with clecos. So that tells me when I go to rivet, every few rivets I have to make sure that it is in fact flat, because it could warp and walk a little bit as I'm riveting. So I need to pay attention to that. So I'll rivet nice and slow. I'll do a few at a time and then check it for flatness and do that. Okay, so now I have to fit this plate. So this is the joining plate, if you will, that goes here. And of course it goes on the inside. And of course there's nothing wrong with drilling it on the outside because you're just match drilling it. And then when you install it, you install it on the inside just like the other plate. And they even say that in the instructions that you can go ahead and drill it on the outside. So I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to mark these holes. And then I'm going to disassemble the whole thing. I'm going to do some more edge finishing. I'm going to deburr the new holes that I've drilled. Then I'll drill these holes here for the plate. get everything to the proper, well, everything will be drilled to the proper size, and then everything will be cleaned and edge finished and all that. And I believe at that point I can start assembly. So let me get moving on that, and I'll be back shortly.